Hi folks, Shawn Preston here. I want to go through the process that I use to get a great sound out of my drums. We're going to use a tom today, but the same approach can be taken on bass drums and snare drums. They're just relative pitch is usually a little bit higher on snare drums, and of course with bass drums, obviously it's usually very low. All right, so the first step that I take is I make sure, first of all, that I have a perfectly round drum shell. This is my Mapex Armory Series 12 by 8 inch tom. And one of the ways that I'm able to make sure that it's round is I take a tape measure and I measure from one lug casing point to the other directly across on the outside of the shell. That gives me the most accurate reading. And I do that at each point, and I take notes to what that measurement is at each point. And then I flip it over and do the same on the bottom side. If I'm doing that every few times that I change heads, it helps me keep track of how round or out of round my shell is getting. As long as you store your drums properly and you don't take them from one extreme to the other without having them well protected in good quality cases or bags, then keeping your drum shells round from the standpoint of humidity and temperature, you'll usually be pretty successful there. So now, the next step that I want to take, once I've verified that my shell is perfectly round, is I want to make sure there are no uneven spots across the bearing edge. And by uneven spots, I mean, have I dropped the drum? Has it been dented? Has it been struck in some way, in a way that has caused any damage to that bearing edge? Most drum companies take very careful consideration with regards to carving bearing edges to make sure that they're very smooth and very round, because otherwise the head won't sit properly on the shell and you'll get uneven tensioning, and no matter how hard you work, no matter how good your ear is, it'll never quite sound as good as a perfectly round shell. So this is a Mapex Armory Series drum shell from a 12 by 8 inch tom, and it's made out of birch in the middle and then sandwiched in between some maple. And the great thing about this drum, first of all, is, it's a beautiful shell. But second of all, is I've already verified that it's round and the bearing edges look great, because I check that virtually every time I change heads. The other key to success with a good drum sound, honestly, is how you mount it. If you're mounting it in a snare stand, which seems to be a pretty common and popular thing to do these days, I don't like to do that because to me, it tends to choke the drum. So I want to make sure that I have a good tom mount mounted to the drum. Back in the day, in the 80s, rims mounts came out, and that was kind of the big thing back then, because it was the first time a drum could truly sit and resonate freely anywhere other than in your hand holding it up by the rim. I like what Mapex has done with their mounts, so it does me well to just mount it with the mounts that come with it on a tom arm on a stand instead of a snare stand. At any rate, that promotes the longest amount of resonance possible, allows the drum to speak naturally. The other key component to my drum sound are Evans heads with the level 360 technology. The greatest thing that Evans ever did in development with regards to recent years is what they've done with their drum heads. They've taken and they've put a curved collar on the inside of this drum head instead of a sharp collar. And what that does specifically, and especially well with Mapex drums in general, when Mapex decided to do the Soniclear bearing edge, they put a curved edge on the outside to help drum heads sit more evenly across the drum. And then when you couple that with the old Evans heads with the 360 technology, it's like the drum head and the Mapex drums were kind of designed for each other from that perspective. Not that Mapex is the only company that does that. There are other companies that do that as well. At any rate, I'm going to flip this over actually, because this is my bottom head. This is an EC Reso head. And I really like the resonant heads because, let me make sure that I'm anal about the position of these labels for some reason. I want to make sure that it sits perfectly flat. And how do I figure out that it's sitting perfectly flat besides checking the bearing edges? That's when I put this head on, does it sit and does it wobble? And if I go around the drum head and I try to push, you know, like teeter-totter, as long as it doesn't wiggle, it sits there perfectly. That's great. All right, so the next thing I want to do in consideration with the roundness of the shell would also be the consideration of the roundness of the rim. You always want to measure the rim in a similar way that you measure the shell. What I would do is take it from each hole for the tension rod on the outside of the rim at the top, like where you would do a rim shot, and I would take a tape measure at each point just to double check to make sure that my rims are round. These are round. I've verified that already. Then I'm going to settle the drum head on there, and I'm going to just finger tighten part way, because at some point it'll get too low for my fingers. I want to make sure I've got all of those gripping. Alright, and then I'm just going to do this until it starts to gain a little bit of tension. And then I come across, directly across from the first lug that I do that with, I go to the next lug. This is not how I will finish it though. A lot of people will go back and forth in a star pattern. I do that, and I do around the head, depending on what part of the process I'm in. Okay, that's settled nicely. I would not use a drill unless you had it set to the lowest tension setting with regards to whether it's going to give you the full power of the drill or whether it's graduated to a sort of a torqued setting. All right, then as I do them all just snug, then I want to go about a quarter turn to each one, okay? Now I'm going to go around the drum head, and if you'll see on the EC series, whether that's a top head or a resonant head, the black line that goes around, kind of like another company's pinstripe version. First of all, with the EC series, this black line, this ink strip that goes along the underside of the head, it is proportionate to the size of the head, which means you're not going to get this exact same size of striping on a 16-inch head. The 16-inch heads are going to be slightly thicker and larger, graduated in size. Vice, if you pulled up an 8-inch head, it would have a much thinner series of lines. And that's one thing that Evans does that I absolutely love, because then it's more uniform in its treatment from one size to the next. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is tap just inside, on the inside of where that black line is, in line with each lug casing. So if this is the one I'm going to start with here at roughly, 7 o'clock? You'll notice that there's a pitch difference. Let's listen to that again. Okay, so I want to bring that one that's lower up just a little. That's a little better. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the drum just like this. This is the part where I said I don't always use the star pattern. All right, once I get to this point, I actually like to take an Evans E-ring Any E-ring will do. I use Evans, and I put it on the drum. If you'll listen, between this lug casing and this lug casing, there is a pitch difference. This one is higher than this one. I didn't really hear that before, but that's partially because there are so many ugly tones going on in this drum. And this is my recording studio space, and it's well controlled with regards to, reverberant sounds. So it can be a challenge to hear that in this room until you dry out the drum a bit with one of these E-rings. And what that does is it shortens the resonance and allows me to really focus on that initial pitch. Now, because this one was higher, I'm going to go around and try to match this one with all the others with this new one. So what's easy to find an easy way to remember how to do that, I would just turn the drum and put it where your other reference lug was. All right, now when I take it off, it'll have a lot more of a pure sound. Okay, let's hear that. All right, now I'm going to flip it over. And the stool that I'm using is curved up enough that it actually provides a little bit of dampening to the bottom head, or whichever head you're not working on, so you don't have to worry about sympathetic tones interfering with what you're trying to listen to. So the EC resonant head is on the bottom. I'm putting the Evans black chrome on the top. What I like about the black chrome series is that it's very, the resonance is not wide open. It has kind of a medium to short sustain, and it's very durable as well, the way it's designed. And it too features the level 360 curved collar, so it'll sit on that drum. I double check to make sure it's not teeter-tottering. Every once in a while the head will come out a little bit funky. That doesn't usually happen with Evans, but very often at all, but it's still worth double checking. So then, as you did should have done with the other side, or as I've done with the other side, I want to make sure that my top hoop is good to go as far as roundness. So I know it is because I've already double checked it. So now I'm just gonna place this on here, set everything evenly, start the tension rods in, and I'm gonna do the same exact thing I did with the bottom to the top. And I'm going to try to actually not go any further up in pitch than I did with the bottom as I tune the top, because I want them to be relatively the same. I personally like to try to get the drum heads to be as close to the same pitch as possible. That's pretty easy with a lot of apps nowadays, with the TuneBot app. And I think there's a couple other, one or two other ones out there that do a similar thing. I'm sure you could do it with another type of tuner that wasn't necessarily designed for drums if it's sophisticated enough. Sometimes I'll dig into my iPhone and pull up the TuneBot app if I'm really trying to get super accurate down to the nearest, get the frequencies to be identical. So I'm going to do about a quarter turn to each one. There's my Evans E-ring. All right, this one seems to be the highest. Nope, it's this one. All right, that sounds pretty good. So the next step for me would be to take this drum, set it on its side, all right, so I think I'm going to pull this up just a little bit. I'm going to go around it clockwise right now, and just a little tiny bit of a turn. I don't want to change the pitch dramatically, just enough to raise the pitch just a little bit. So when I'm checking to see which one's higher, I want to take my fingers and dampen the head that I'm not trying to hear. So if I just want to hear the top head, obviously you dampen this one. So now this one is higher. The resonant side is higher, so now I want to bring up the top head just a little. But I don't want to choke the drum. You know, sometimes I walk into this one place where I play at, and I play on a backline kit where somebody has, for some unknown reason, cranked even the 16-inch head up on the lowest floor tom to some ridiculous amount of tension. Now, if you want a high pitch out of a drum, then get a drum that's small enough to give you that pitch without choking it off. And by choking, I mean you're tightening the head too tight. So it's really close. This one is still a little bit lower than the bottom one, but I think it's probably pretty good. Let's hit it. So I've got a little bit of a buzz. Probably when I started messing with it, it got a little bit. All right. Much better. Let's double check the bottom. All right. It's got a dark sound because the black chrome heads are generally a little darker than clear heads. They're a little bit thicker millimeter wise. So, but other than that, it's got a nice controlled resonant tone. It resonates freely, but not so much that I have to introduce a lot of gating when I'm recording or when the sound engineer is mixing live. It's controlled resonance. And that's about it. That's how I do it. If you want to do this to larger drums, you take the pitch relative to the size, put a medium tension on it, and you'll get the most pure sound that you can out of that drum. If you take each step, make sure each lug casing is in tune with each other, with all the others. Same thing on the bottom, or if you started with the top, or bottom, same thing with the top. And then if you want to maximize the pureness of the sound without having any dipping or rising of pitch, then try to match the top head tension pitch with the bottom head tension and pitch. If you do that, you'll have the purest sounding resonance possible. Now, if you want the drum to rise as it decays, then the bottom head should be tuned some amount higher than the top head. That will allow that note to rise. If you want it to sink, you do the other. You make it a little lower than the top. So, but I like to have a pure sound. That way, no matter start to finish, I get the cleanest sound possible. That's it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section, and I'll do my best to come back and answer it. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.